Hello and welcome everybody. This is another special episode of That's Entertainment, where this week we'll be talking to Phil Clapp, the Chief Executive of the UK Cinema Association. Hello, Phil.
I would say, without sounding kind of glib or overconfident, we're in this slightly odd situation of having more cinemas now than we had immediately pre-pandemic. Wow. We lost a couple of smaller sites and they were sad losses. But actually, that supply line of new cinemas and a lot of focus has been placed on the kind of the boutique chains, as it were. But there were cinemas all shapes and sizes that were planned. Many of those, half a dozen or more, have opened since May 2021 when cinemas reopened, and we're seeing openings almost on a kind of monthly basis at the moment. So that, whether investors have seen the resilience of the sector and have gained greater confidence now, or whether that confidence has just continued, certainly there's no sense that there isn't still a willingness to invest in both new cinemas, but also in refurbishing existing cinemas. What we have seen over the last 10 years or so with the growth of cinemas in number and in diversity is a much greater effort on the part of local authorities to attract cinemas in, because they see them as, key social and community assets, but also conversely, a much greater effort by cinema operators and developers to engage with local government so that the infrastructure which a cinema will support is in place and the thing has the best chance of success.
Which audience segments are returning to cinemas and which aren't?
So I think the script's probably a fairly familiar one. I mean, early on from opening in May 2021, the return was kind of led essentially by young people, young adults and families. And, although No Time to Die was clearly a, huge boost for the industry, what I think we saw coming into 2022 was a concern that older audiences weren't returning in the numbers that we'd hoped, and that there wasn't, it was almost kind of call and response, and that with the exception of one or two films, Belfast being the obvious example, there really wasn't the slate that was likely to get them back in. And there was a sense that, perhaps for understandable reasons, that residual concern around COVID and safety and getting into an indoor space with other people they didn't know was a continuing concern. I mean, almost the confident point from that was all the surveys that we undertook of audiences suggested that audience or that age group, it wasn't that they were doing other things and not going to the cinema. They were just cutting down on their out-of-home activity. Almost, entirely, essentially. What we've seen, I think, over the first 4 or 5 months of this year is that reluctance, that concern has started to dissipate, and we're starting to see audiences across all demographics return. There's still work to be done, and certainly what you'll hear is a familiar plea from cinema operators around the current dearth of family films, for example, to get families back in. But what I think we are seeing, and what we'll see over the summer, where the straight is extraordinarily strong, is that diversity of content. That's something for everyone, which means that that upward trajectory that we've seen in terms of not just headline admissions but across different demographic groups will continue. And I think most of us are confident that maybe not by the end of this year, but certainly as we get into 2023, we're going to start to see the type of success we're seeing immediately pandemic, which was unprecedented in recent times. What is undoubtedly true is you've seen a level of cooperation and partnership between exhibition and distribution unlike anything we've seen before. And that's both in terms of, kind of dialogue on how to manage the lockdown, how to manage the unlock, but also in terms of promotion of the cinema going experience. I think we've all been to those kind of events and Cine Europe and CinemaCon, and exhibitors and distributors get up on a stage and they say, what we need is more data sharing. And then we move on a year and basically very little has happened in that regard, and they make the plea again. We are definitely seeing that kind of dam start to break in terms of those type of things. And that will mean that, distributors have a much better view of their customers, as it were, for their films. The starting premise, which is one which clearly some in the media like to kind of promote, is that, cinema and streaming are in some kind of eternal fight to the death. What's good for cinema is bad for streaming, and what's good for streaming is bad for cinema. And the vast majority of people, both certainly I can speak about for cinema operators, but also I think within theatrical distribution, don't see it that way. I think we understand that actually quite often the people who are the best customers of streaming are also the best customers of cinema. They love film and they choose to see some films at home, and they choose to see some films on the big screen. Clearly, we would prefer them to see more films on the big screen, but it's not a zero-sum game in that regard. But I think what we need to do on our side, and what we've always needed to do, is to make the cinema-going experience, that word, as attractive as possible. We need to ensure that we're as good as our word in terms of saying that when you come to the cinema, you will see the film in the best possible format, in the best possible environment, with top-notch sound, top-notch vision, a nice environment, and the best cinema offer you can get. And we need to do more to promote that. We need to do more to actually have our customers as ambassadors. What may be an unintended, perhaps, but a positive consequence of the type of things we're seeing with Netflix in particular, is that they start looking afresh at whether or not they want to release their films into the theatrical environment with a what we would call a sensible window, as it were. If their revenue from subscribers is going down, they're going to need to, you would presume, find revenue from elsewhere. And what we've seen over the period of the pandemic, where some of the studios and some of the streaming services have attempted day and date releases or nears, those films have always underperformed, essentially. Underperformed because you don't get the shop window that a cinema release provides, but also, more importantly, underperformed because we've seen, and it gives us no pleasure to say it, but we've seen what we've always predicted, is that if you put a film out day and date on digital and in cinema, you just get rampant piracy. And that's money which doesn't go to cinemas, doesn't go to the studios or the streamers. That's just money which goes to the ether, to be perfectly honest.
Windows, were completely sort of broken down during the period of the pandemic. There's been a renegotiation around the 30 to 45-day window. Could we delve into that a little bit?
Now, I would say that, and a number of the larger operators have gone on record to say that there is now a recognition that the windows of the length that we were seeing pre-pandemic probably aren't achievable now. But I would also say that there's no settlement, as it were, on the exhibition side in terms of whether it's a 30 or 45-day window. And I say that for two reasons. One, because we're still, although the pandemic is to a degree in the rearview mirror, I think, the business models are still working their ways through. And my sense is that most exhibitors would like something longer than where we currently are. We've traveled from day and date, or near as makes no difference, day and date in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, and even during the pandemic, to something longer. And I think, while there's no desire, I think, or ambition to achieve or to go back to where we were, I think that the desire currently is for some further movement, particularly, as you say, for the larger films, which have a longer lifetime on screen and which have a kind of more a longer shelf life, as it were. We also need to be mindful of the fact that we have a significant number of smaller operator members who either choose not to, or more often are not allowed to by the distributor, play films on date. So if you're only allowed, or if you only choose to play a film on week 3 or week 4 of its release, and you're talking about a 30, 45-day window, you're immediately on a kind of burning deck, to be perfectly honest. And it's not just about actually that film's availability in the home. It's about the advertising of that film's availability in the home. Because a trend we saw pre-pandemic, and which is still there, is that, films are quite often advertised as being available several weeks ahead of their actual availability, essentially. Yeah. So I think we are undoubtedly heading towards a more what you might call kind of nuanced position. And it's clear that, and some of the studios have said this, they will more so than ever take decisions on a film-by-film basis.
It was a real pleasure to talk with you and get some more of the industry perspective into what we're doing with That's Entertainment.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Nick. Take care. Bye.